This podcast is recorded on the traditional and unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Coquitlam peoples.
British Columbia, I've seen your mountains high, seen your pretty rainbows and your blue crystal skies, watched your winding rivers as they flow around the bend. To me you're not a stranger, you'll always be a friend.
Coming to you from the West Coast, this is Politicos. Today is April 2nd, 2026.
I'm Scott Lundeboom.
And I'm Ian Bushfield. On today's show, new bills, new leaders, and trains are suddenly controversial. We'll get into all of that because apparently the legislature's back and a lot of things had to happen all at once. And a Canadian's going to the moon, so that's cool at least.
You know, if they can get their outlook to work properly. Which is like the most relatable an astronaut has been in a long time, is also
astronauts. They're just like us.
Yes, I too was having problems with Outlook today, as I would guess most Outlook users were having.
They also have a toilet up there for the first time out of Earth's atmosphere.
Well, low Earth orbit.
Yes.
That's a dark question. The trains are finally becoming controversial. I remember the fights about the Broadway subway line. They've always been controversial, disappointingly.
We'll end with that. Let's start with asking you for money, patreon.com/politicos, and support the podcast. Let's get into the BC legislature, which is back this week and busy. They introduced 5 new bills, one of which is an omnibus bill. Bill 14, the Forest Statutes Amendment Act, really outside both our wheelhouses, but is a promise by the government that these legislative changes will allow them to sell hundreds of thousands more units. I don't even know the right units of timber
They use
sales.
cubic meters in the press release.
Okay. I saw a press opposition critic criticize this, as is their job, as tinkering and ultimately not doing that much, and it's unclear why they feel they have to do this by legislative means as opposed to just regulatory and policy means.
I think one of the things is they're introducing a new type of license in there. Something about salvage. I guess wood that is from down trees or something. This will now allow them to sell the rights to the lodge. So probably not something you could do just with regulations, be my guess.
And, you know, one of the things EB's talking up is the need to get resources out, and forestry is the oft forgotten industry, I feel like, in terms of resources in BC as we get...
Is it? I don't know.
Well,
maybe it's my family's from
it's
like...
less discussed.
Yeah, I don't know. It might just be that my family's from like Port Alberni, where that's like a very big part of the industry there. But yeah, I think it hasn't broken through as a controversy in a little while. Not since like 3 years ago, was it, with Fairy Creek?
Yeah. When we talk about like the growth of the province, there's a lot of focus on critical minerals and LNG and those kind of resources, but the trees have always been there, will hopefully always be there if they're replanted sustainably. The old growth ones, I guess, won't, but, you know, keeping that industry going and ensuring that it's profitable for the province has always been a critical part of the goal here, and it's unfortunately poorly understood by laymen like me. So all I can say is I will wait to see if this proves controversial or is trivial, or on the rare chance it's actually successful in driving economic growth. And kind of similarly, and being overlooked and forgotten, is Bill 15 this term, which is an amendment to the Environmental Assessment Act, and we could find no coverage of this. I found one Law 360 article and one that just basically regurgitated the government's press release.
Yeah, I was a little unsure what was in here because the press release just talks about we're making changes to the dispute resolution system to make it more transparent and predictable. There is a current one that was brought in with the last time they passed an environmental assessment bill back in 2018, and they're tweaking it. How exactly is not clear in the press release, and that we would have to have a deeper understanding of the fine points of the text of the existing law to actually do a line-by-line comparison in the legislative text that dropped. So I was hoping somebody in one of the many press outfits would have gone to a briefing and asked some questions about this and wrote it up, but unfortunately couldn't find much on it, which I think kind of goes to show where or the loss that is the decline in media, because at one time even the smaller bills probably would have been reported out.
Give us a lot more money so that we can be there or hire someone to be there. Patreon.com/Politicoast. But seriously, there is a second part of this bill as well that is a little bit more understandable to me. Part of the challenge of environmental assessments is, a project will come forward and needs to go through the environmental assessment process, and people have opinions. And the point of the bill is to navigate and get through to a yes or no based on, adjudicating all those opinions. And it was set up to include Indigenous people here, industry, other stakeholders. But we've had a couple cases where bills, projects near the border, for example, impact waterways that might infect U.S. tribal First Nations. And there's some court precedents between when the Environmental Assessment Act was brought in 2018 and today that shows they do have a right to be involved. And so this bill, I think, tries to address that in a more predictable way than legislation or than litigation. So again, not lawyerly enough to know the details here, but that seems reasonable on the first blush.
Yeah. So it's a little annoying trying to find stuff on it, because when you Google Bill 15 in BC, there's a lot coming up from last year on that Bill 15. And I really think if a bill gets to have a certain amount of coverage and controversy, they should just retire the number, like a jersey number sometimes gets retired, just to make it easier to search for it.
EcoJustice wrote an article today about last year's Bill 15 and also about environmental assessment generally, but it's not about this bill. And so it annoyed me. Not that I necessarily disagree with them or anything, it's just very annoying to try to figure out what is happening in this province.
Can we get some better SEO for the legislation, please?
The next bill, our favorite kind of bill, a Miscellaneous Statutes Amendment Bill 16. This is quite the bill where they released 5 separate press releases that I found on the government's website for this. There's the one for the bill as its own, and then 4 separate ones highlighting major sections of this. So let's pick this omnibus up. Off the top, it starts with the Judicial Review Procedures Act, and it does 2 things. Number 1, it eliminates the section of the Judicial Review Procedure Act that says you can apply for it whenever you want. And they say, no, it's going to be 60-day deadlines for all judicial reviews, or at least most. I did look, and it seems like that is the case right now based on like the Administrative Procedures Act or the Administrative Tribunals Act. And so, fine.
And if we're just neither of us are lawyers, but like 60 days seems like a reasonable time frame to put together the initial filing for a review on this. It's not a crazy small number. It's not, a week or 2, which would be pushing up on it. You can't get a appeal filed in 60 days. You're probably asleep at the switch on that one.
30 is getting tight for lawyers. 60 is okay. 90 is like, all right, you can breathe to get this in. So, whatever. The other part of this is, as they describe it, clarifying how sensitive cabinet information is protected during court challenges, while ensuring judicial reviews remain streamlined and focused on accountability, rather than becoming expensive trial-like proceedings. And,
I mean, a judicial review is a kind of trial.
It's a review. It's a trial of whether the government may, or administrative tribunal made a reasonable decision or not. Cabinet confidence and cabinet information is particularly relevant because I know the former Victoria School Board trustees are currently in the Supreme Court of BC in judicial review against the Minister of Education who fired them. And one of the issues that came up was whether the government should have to disclose sensitive cabinet information about the decision to fire them. Funny that.
Yeah, so this one will probably be a little controversial if it doesn't sneak through, buried in with the rest, no doubt.
Because especially that section applies before, on, or after the date that it comes into force. So we're just
nice little retroactive bit there.
Generally,
just to level set a bit, though, generally cabinet documents are considered privileged and are not publicly accessible, but that does sometimes get challenged in court. But like the default here is that the stuff is kept secret.
Yeah, the way the process it sets out here will work is a minister, the cabinet secretary, or deputy cabinet secretary can certify in writing that information is a confidence of the executive council or any of its committees. And if that happens, you cannot be compelled to disclose it in an application for judicial review. I don't have the decision that said they have to release some of the information, because I think some of that was argued not subject to cabinet privilege. For technical reasons, but this really feels like they're trying to just get around that, which still makes me wonder, on what basis did they fire the Victoria School Board a couple years ago? And maybe we won't get to know. But let's get back to this omnibus.
Yeah, equally interesting on that is just kind of indicative of a late governmentitis on this, where the government that 8-9 years ago came in all ready to change things and be more transparent and better than the last people are now at the point of, we're tweaking the rules to make it easier for us to avoid some bumps in the road kind of thing.
Doug Ford's doing it too, only his shredding of freedom of information is going even further with some of their latest bills. And
it's more ridiculous.
Yeah. So next section that gets touched by this bill is the Fuel Price Transparency Act. Honestly, couldn't say what they're doing here. It says enable an industry-funded model where the BCUC can recover costs of administering the Fuel Price Transparency Act. Sure. More notable, though, is the change to the Zero Emission Vehicle Act is they are changing our 2035 EV sales targets from 100% of new vehicles to 75%.
And get rid of the rule that just bans internal combustion engine vehicles after January 1st, 2035.
Yes, because that other 25% will have to be something. They will have to have some emission vehicles allowed to be sold. It's not a surprising change there, but I know a lot are disappointed that our climate efforts seem to be softening by the day.
Still, 75% is a lot on that, and with everything going on, just building in a little more flexibility is not the worst idea out there. Particularly because, do you remind me if this only applied to passenger vehicles, or is it all vehicle sales?
I believe it's light vehicles.
Okay.
I don't have that in front of me. Passenger vehicles. The car you drive at home, not necessarily a semi-truck. Don't quote me for sure on that, though.
It's a little more reasonable then, because if it was a semi-tractor, the larger industrial ones that are harder to electrify, having a firm deadline might not have been the best on that.
The bill additionally amends the Greater Vancouver Sewerage and Drainage District Act, South Coast BC Transportation Authority Act, Local Government Act, Vancouver Charter, with a series of changes to lower housing costs is their claim, and also to allow municipalities to better access financing and federal government programs.
TBD on the first one?
Also TBD on the second, a future bilateral agreement once program details are finalized.
Mm-hmm. I think this week, or maybe end of last week, the federal government and Ontario and Toronto came together on a big deal to lower development charges, which is good, and maybe there's some stuff underway with BC on this that they're setting the groundwork for. So I could maybe see something along those lines there. And we do absolutely need to cut development charges. It's actually ridiculous how much of the cost of new housing is just government taxes on there, and that's a crazy thing to have in a housing crisis. But the actual details on this are a little scarce because, well, the press release tots up about how we're, expanding all these categories and everything. The actual list of categories is going to be something that comes out in regulation later, which is a fairly common approach this government's taken, where they basically just pass bills enabling regulation, which is not necessarily the greatest for understanding what the government is trying to do, or the democratic accountability aspect of having a opposition party that's able to challenge the details of it as it's going through the legislature, rather than much later, after attention is shifted elsewhere, then having to bring up a regulation that gets promulgated.
You're not a fan of the Just Trust Us Act?
No. I think it's one of the many things that's eroded in Canadian democracy.
I know I wasn't on for that episode, but the Places of Public Worship Act, Protection Act, the bubble zone around churches bill, I went through that thoroughly, and it does set out fairly clearly what it's doing, but then it has these subsequent sections that are like, oh, we can also redefine this, that, and the other thing by regulation. And you're like, well, you could just rewrite the entire bill by order in council. What are we doing here? You tell me where you start, but I don't know where you're going to end either. It's frustrating. The miscellaneous statutes continues. It touches the Manufactured Home Park Tenancy Act and Residential Tenancy Act with housekeeping changes. Sure, I don't think either of us have looked thoroughly at those. Sometimes they call things housekeeping that are a little more substantive, but hopefully, yeah, they're replacing hearing with dispute resolution proceeding in one spot, and that's pretty housekeeping usually. The change to the University Endowment Land Act is actually kind of interesting. Right now, bylaw officers and police can't actually enforce bylaws on the UEL other than using the Offense Act and civil proceedings in court, because there's no authority to fine people on the UEL.
This seems like an oversight.
Yeah. It's almost like people weren't meant to live there. Anyway, they're going to change it so the cops can give you a ticket for something you'd get a ticket 5 minutes to the east. I mean, fine. It seems reasonable. Seems like long overdue. And there's additionally some changes to the Corrections Act around mental health crisis in prisons and what responses they can do. Again, there's a lot of technical things in there, but that's that bill as a whole.
Oh, there's also the civil asset forfeiture provisions in there as well, which they're expanding staffing and creating specialized investigation and litigation teams to operate within the office there. Mention that this is in part to fulfill the Cullen Commission recommendation regarding it. Civil asset forfeiture can be a little controversial and maybe not the best in terms of procedural fairness or civil liberties issues on that, mostly because you can get hit with some fairly serious consequences for alleged criminality, but the burden of proof is much, much lower for these proceedings compared to criminal charge.
Yeah, we've talked about this on the pod in the past, and I don't think any of the changes here are significantly expanding that creep. It's more refinement of it, and maybe just a bit more capacity. Some with the ZEV targets, they also announced that they're going to put more money into, I believe, the charging network as well. So they're trying to make up for the fact they're not going to sell as many EVs by making those of us who have them better able to charge them. Just kind of the offset. So, yeah, I think the big thing to watch there is the response on the judicial review changes and whether that gets picked up, especially by those former Victoria School Board trustees. There were 2 additional bills that were introduced around municipal issues, one requiring codes of conduct and one allowing parental leave. I think I'll try to cover those on Cambie Report with Matthew next week, or else we'll talk about them in Slack. The bill we don't have this week is on the Declaration of Rights of Indigenous People Act, which Premier Eby has promised to push into law before the end of May, but we don't have the bill yet. We don't know. There is a leak from the Canadian press, and David Eby had some interviews and discussions and consultations with Indigenous leaders today before he had a press conference where he talked about possibly suspending sections of DRIPA for 3 years pending some, the appeal of the Gitala court case.
Yeah, and this was after spending the last several months talking about how he was going to change a couple provisions in the Act in order to, in their words, bring it into the alignment of what the actual original intent was going to be of not creating a basis for striking down laws as being inconsistent with it. But that's now apparently shelved. The whole thing is just an absolute mess that the government has badly mishandled, and now they're just caught between a rock and a hard place where nobody's happy. Nobody can agree on how to change things to make everyone happy, and they're just being pulled in all directions in this in a way that's just, I think, really has a chance that this might be the issue that ends up sinking the NDP when it comes time for them to eventually lose government.
It's always hard to pinpoint the issue. They are making this a confidence motion, or at least that's the plan, according to Eby. And it's hard to tell whether this hypothetical bill that will someday be introduced and we will get to see it, whether he is making it a confidence issue just to force the speaker to be on his side, or I don't know why, but he'd be wanting to go to the polls over this.
Oh, that was like the stupid to do.
So absolute worst issue for him to fight on. What if you shoot your base in the foot and give fodder to your opponents in the same time?
Yeah, the base is already unhappy with this. This divides the NDP coalition somewhat here and unites the opposition, which is just never an issue that you want to have on that. Plus, the more recent polling we've gotten on DRIPA finds that it's now underwater in support and gotten significantly less popular in the last, would that be 7 months or so since August? So it's now based on Angus Reid's poll they put out on March 31st. It's sitting at 30 support, 53 oppose, 16 don't know, and that's changed from 39 support, 44 oppose, 17 don't know back in August on there. So you also would be going to the polls on an issue that is against the government, kind of, depending on what the government's position of the day is.
The response to this has obviously been negative from First Nations leaders. I guess the original plan was to introduce amendments that would rewrite how the bill works and just leave it at that and walk away. And leaders said, no, we liked how it worked. We worked on it with you. It was unanimously adopted by the legislature. Let's move forward. And so his compromise is, well, what if we just fuck around with it for a couple of years and then it goes back to how it was? And they're like, and I think they found one chief who was like, that's not as bad, I guess. Yeah, and everyone else is like, no, this is bad. We don't like it.
No, and the people who want to see more uncertainty out of this and were not happy with the uncertainty that's been created recently on this are also not going to be happy because that's out there lingering. There's an argument that this is just going to pause all the court stuff until the appeals go through. Yet I could also see we're playing around with temporary suspensions not being looked on super favorably on the court by the court. At least with we're just changing the text of the law. That's a clear, there's legislative intent to go in a specific direction, and the underlying law is now different, and that'll moot out this stuff. But if you're just doing temporary changes to it, that feels a lot more suspect in terms of how it would get viewed.
So they're fucked either way because, I mean, someone will sue no matter what. It's kind of the position they seem to have put themselves in. But like, if we're saying this ties to constitutional indigenous rights and title, or even pre-constitutional rights and title issues, there is a well-established duty to consult. And if they just push through a bill without consulting sincerely and meaningfully, that wouldn't be viewed favorably. If they push forward this temporary measure, that creates uncertainty. The thing about DRIPA is it didn't cause the Cowichan decision. It can't be understated enough, or can't be overstated enough, that the Cowichan decision wasn't based on DRIPA. It was based on rights going, land disputes going back to how this country was made.
Mostly.
And DRIPA
on that.
DRIPA only enters in as like an interpretive, like, hey, look, the government is committing to reconciliation and trying to solve these issues without doing litigation. That's what they talked about at the time it was introduced.
Yeah, so on the Cowichan stuff, yeah, that's not the main basis for it at all. It does get mentioned in the decision. I've read through the fee simple part of that. I did not get through the whole 2,000 pages of the decision.
I did a quick search. I think it only comes up twice.
Yeah, it definitely did get mentions in those sections that I read as part of the interpretation, and particularly if I'm recalling correctly on when it came to the land title acts being inconsistent with Aboriginal title and the indefensibility part of fee simple. So it wasn't entirely disconnected from it. The main thrust of the decision would have not changed. It is a factor specifically in the part about fee simple titles and how they interact with Aboriginal title in it. And yeah, it was also in the what was the name of the other case?
Gitala, the mining one.
That one, it was a little more central in.
Yeah, because that's where they went, and the nation argued I believe it was the mining
the mineral
licenses
claims,
were
the online mineral claim system on that
was inconsistent.
Yeah, the part I'm a little curious by or struck by is someone somewhere had their expectations set incorrectly regarding this, and I'm really curious on where it was, because when the original bill was being passed and then when the Interpretation Act was being passed, the government swore up and down that this was not going to create a cause of action. This wasn't going to result in courts being able to strike down these provisions or other laws based on this. And that was part of the reason why it got unanimous consent during the debate on this. And subsequently, we've heard some of the people who were in the House at the time in the opposition benches express some regret on that. But regardless, that's where the expectations were set there. Considering the blowback on changing it to be more clear in those respects, sounds like expectations among Indigenous leaders were that this was going to lead to something more substantive on that, and somewhere that someone got misled on this one, and I would like to know where that was exactly.
I feel like the BC government is trying to rewrite history a bit, and saying now that 7 years ago, because I haven't gone back through those 2019 Hansards to see what they did and didn't say, but I don't remember cause of action coming up as a big point of discussion in that.
I do remember, I'm not going to necessarily say to what was spoken in Hansard, but I remember at the time there was criticism that this bill would enable courts to strike down just any bit of BC legislation, and that the government's stance in rebuttal to that was that no, that was not true.
Like when I look at what Adam Olsen is writing today about this, because he was there for those discussions, right? He was in the legislature, in the Supply and Confidence Agreement with the Oregon government. He thinks the bill should stand as it is, or the law should stand as it is. There should be genuine talks and work to, come to better decisions rather than rush amendments through in this, sitting when he hasn't had the time to properly have consultations with all of the same amount of people who were involved in that era. Nothing Olson is writing suggests that he viewed it that way.
Yeah, that's what I mean about different people came away from that with very different understandings of what this was going to entail, and somewhere someone was misled, and I want to know where on that. But yeah, either way, the government's mishandled this one is pretty clear on all of it. And
they just abandoned leadership, right? They're
waffling back and forth on this. They can't even decide a way to go about this at all. And
well, I think
they're basic
open consultation does require them to have some flexibility, but it's unclear what he wants to do other than fix things.
Yeah, in the government is saying that they're it's just impractical to turn everything over to a case where whoever sues first gets to be the one that has their thing dealt with first. So the original DRIPA was put in place to bring all of BC's laws into alignment with UNDRIP on this. But that is a huge amount of work. We're talking, tens of thousands of pages of laws, hundreds of thousands of clauses of law to go through on this. A government that was working hard and deliberately on this. And, we talked about several bills earlier. I don't think we mentioned it when we were going through there, but several of the ones we already talked about today that got brought in had significant First Nations consultations, and including in the various processes they brought in on those in terms of the environmental assessment, the forest statutes amendments, and some of those. This is a government that, whatever you might want to say about how they've reacted to these couple court cases, is pretty clearly making a pretty good faith effort to go through and bring laws one by one into more alignment with UNDRIP on this. But that's a process that even a government like this one that is working hard on that will take decades to do. It's just going to be a long process considering how much material there is, the fact that consultations have to be done as part of it, and those are not necessarily quick. But you can't turn it into a case where whoever files a court case last gets to be the one that Q jumps to have that particular law suddenly jump to the top of, this is the one we're dealing with now. That's no way to run a government or a process on this, and taking that out and bringing it into a more deliberate piece by piece, legislation by legislation approach actually makes a fair bit of sense in terms of how do you manage the actual work of this.
They haven't proved that's the case, though. There was one lower court ruling that went against them, which could quite likely be overturned on appeal, at least on that, specific aspect, in which case all of this hypothetical legislation or litigation that they're saying is coming against them evaporates.
I mean,
a lot.
Yeah, but it's also once it is proven that and the precedent's established, it does really open things up, and
not if it gets overturned. We haven't fully. The BC Supreme Court does not set precedent for the higher courts.
No, it was a Court of Appeals decision, not a Supreme Court one. They were reviewing the I believe it was a Supreme Court case on that, but it's definitely Court of Appeals decision.
Okay, yeah, it's Court of Appeal. Okay,
so it does have precedential. Does have precedential
value,
and they're clearly trying to manage this, and leaving that out there for a very lengthy proceeding is not necessarily going to be good, because that could also, in the meantime, you could also start to get more of those cases citing the as of now current decision in the matter.
In terms of the work they are doing, the bill, what DRIPA did do is set out the requirement for annual reporting. And so I'll put the link because it's interesting to poke around at it, and then we can start moving on from this. But they have an action plan, they have priorities, they're talking about which laws they're already working on and moving forward in. And there's broader things to that, like promoting self-determination and self-government, ending indigenous-specific racism, social, economic, cultural well-being. So it's a huge chunk of work, but it's like important stuff to ideally get us out of courts and into nation-to-nation relationships, which is where it will always have to go, or it's going to end up back in court. Like, you could pretend, and you can kick the can down the road. We've been doing that for 150 years. But at this point in history, I think a lot of nations are sick and tired of empty promises, broken promises, and waiting. And so you either show up at the table or you show up in court. So we'll see. We'll see what the government brings forward and tries to push and how that goes. But in other things that aren't working, the speculation and vacancy tax. Apparently, we're not collecting it for the most part. Fools, sucks to be you if you're paying it, because you apparently could have gotten away with not doing it, and no one would have done anything.
Well, eventually
quite.
they'd put a lien on your property, which, unless you're financing something I guess they're going to sell, isn't really too much of a disincentive to do anything at the moment. And considering that the alleged problem was people coming in with big cash purchases and then buying stuff up, not sure make it harder to renew a mortgage is necessarily going to cause a lot of people to be dissuaded by that, those that are hit by it.
So great work by Andrew McLeod at the Tyee, who found this internal audit report on the provincial taxation revenues, speculation and vacancy tax posted on the Finance Ministry's website, apparently in like November or December. And he decided to read this for fun. And it has great lines like, the cumulative effects of the issues described in this report is that the Ministry of Finance is not able to collect significant amounts of tax owing to the province. Quote, a mature tax administration consistently collects its tax revenues. In this case, we didn't.
Yeah, and it also highlighted some problems with the attestation-based approach to all of this.
Yeah, so this accounts for the government over 5 years actually collecting $311 million, but they've had to put liens on $74 million, or put $74 million of liens on properties where payment is overdue, and another $317 million is pending collection, reassessment, or subsequent declarations, and it's just kind of like...
So more money is not collected than they actually brought it.
Yes.
Yeah. What?
So some of that might be just people missed their declarations, because apparently there aren't enough or any penalties for that.
Which, the government's now said they're going to bring in, I think it's a $250 one they said on there.
Yeah.
Which, it'd be good to get more people up to date on it, and it can... But like, what I don't understand about this is the government has all the information on who's on title of the various properties. I mean, that's how they know who to send the declaration forms to. But they also have a lot of information about who's filing taxes and who is being dealt with in terms of receiving other various government benefits and services and stuff. And why are you making people who the government is clearly dealing with them at that place of residence go through the trouble of having to fill out one of these things every year, when if one part of the government talked to another part of the government, you could probably eliminate a whole bunch of that and then do a much more targeted approach where there is gaps or something flags for, this is someone potentially who would get impacted by this. And that way you could actually shift the enforcement stuff from the person who just forgot to file, or, in case that actually happened to my family, the person was dealing with some pretty serious health stuff and like it got forgotten for a couple of years. And then there was a lien to deal with after their passing. Like, there are better ways to do this for sure than the system that it's structured now. If you could get one part of the government working with another.
Some privacy issues exist in there, which is why it hasn't worked. But like, fundamentally, I don't disagree.
Yeah, I just like, I know there are specific privacy rules, but like some of those can be pretty silly when you can't have one TATS part of the government talk to another TATS part of the government.
Yeah, well, I mean, like, when I file my taxes, I have to say, yes, you can add me to the voter roll, or let Elections Canada know about me and other things. So
yeah, I'm just saying, like,
I don't know.
I think there's very much a role for privacy in terms of government to non-government stuff. A lot of government to government processes would probably be improved if we could ease off that a little bit on just the internal workings.
Not necessarily disagreeing. The response to this from the BC Conservatives is, well, housing is slowing down anyway, so what are we doing? Let's just get rid of this tax. We need to encourage investment in this province, even if it is, quote, speculation and vacancy.
I mean, it's not the best thing to do, but like, also, we brought this in years ago now, and I don't know if you noticed, housing prices did not correct, despite the insistence from many people that the sole problem was foreign buyers and speculators in BC. So, yeah, a couple $100 million extra is like not the worst thing, but it's hardly a big win on the actual thing it was supposed to help with.
And they had a couple studies early on that they got, 10 or 20,000 units out of it, possibly a little bit more than that. I might be underestimating. So
it's like something
better
but
than
that's
nothing.
Like
yeah. Plus the money, so not the end of the world, but yeah. So the BC Cons. Let's keep moving on. We got more to talk about. Lots happening in their leadership. Endorsements are going around. Carrie Lynn Findlay gets endorsed by Peter MacKay and Jordan Keeley. Kind of interesting pairing. The progressive conservative from the other side of the country and the independent conservative from northern BC.
I don't think Peter MacKay carries a whole lot of weight in BC, so...
It's so weird.
It's at most like a, hey, we got some press attention for our campaign on that one. Same thing for several of the other endorsements here. The only real notable one I'll mention is Jason Kenney endorsing Caroline Elliott.
I think Daryl Jones also endorsing Caroline Elliott and dropping out of the race is worth a note, but...
Yeah, although he was kind of a non-entity.
Just so that he's not, yeah.
Yeah. The more interesting thing in that is that it's actually finally collapsing down to a not full clown car of a ballot on that one.
Yeah. Another combination, speaking of the independents, is Yuri Fulmer announced a Unite the Right Accord with Dallas Brody, whereby if he wins the Conservative leadership race, One BC will stand down in certain ridings, and the Conservatives will stand down in 5, and they would be open to doing a confidence and supply agreement if that's what it took to form government. And it's weird. Yeah,
this one's weird. I don't think this is actually going to win him any support, really, or too much in the race, but and to the extent it does, you're trading a temporary advantage now for a problem down the road, because on the off chance he does win, you can bet that the NDP Oppo team is just going to hammer the hell out of the Conservatives during the next election on this one, and not unreasonably on that front.
But, yeah, it seems like a massive liability to team up with the crazy person.
Yeah, and there's a line of thought that has really gotten rooted in the right that absolutely you cannot have any kind of split at all, because that's how you lose and are relegated to permanent opposition status. And it leads to some real dumb things where the party ends up tacking much harder to the right to try and pick up 5% rather than going for the big group of voters in the middle that are gettable. And it's almost always a pyrrhic victory on that front. And, there's also something to be said for having a party further to your flank that just collects the crazy people, and you can be like, yeah, we are not them. We're the reasonable ones. You can see that because all the nutcases are over there.
Yeah.
And I'm just saying, the optimum number of vote for the Conservatives, the optimum number of voters for One BC or the People's Party might not be 0.
The other campaign we'll mention is Peter Milbar, whose team this week was complaining to the organizing committee of the leadership race, because it wouldn't be a Conservative race without internal party drama. They
Isn't
are
that
specifically
most, leadership races.
The complaints don't usually come from the front runners, or don't always, or at least people nearer the front. Miliband's campaign is asking for a delayed membership deadline and just like push all the timelines back. So instead of the eligibility ending April 18th, voting May 9th, and the decision on May 30th, just like we need more time because of significant issues with the signups of memberships. Miliband's campaign says they don't have access to the real-time portal or dashboard system that they can use to identify supporters as they sign up online. Instead, they're getting a weekly spreadsheet email, which is annoying them. Apparently, the BC Conservatives inherited the BC Liberal BC Win system and have renamed it BC Go. But in this transition and leasing of the database system, they haven't integrated it well. Rob Shaw calls it like the gold standard of political organizing systems that was developed for the BC Liberals between 2010 and 2016 or whatever in the 2010s. But that to me tells me it is quite dated, and trying to move it into a modern system probably was going to have some issues. And they're having those.
Is it even a problem if it's all the candidates that are getting the same list at the same time? Like, this only seems like it should be an issue if his campaign is getting the weekly emailed list and everybody else gets real-time access. But if everybody's just on the same thing, it's just equally inconvenient, and it's fine. And what's does more to undermine the credibility of the race isn't the frequency at which lists get distributed from Central Party. It's going around and mucking with the rules after you've announced them in order to make one of the candidates happy.
Yeah, it's an interesting complaint. Shaw notes in his piece that none of the other campaigns are complaining, and they're mostly saying what you just said. We don't usually get real-time access, so what are you complaining about?
I don't think that's even unusual for leadership races to have lists distributed periodically rather than having direct access to the party database in real time.
So, I don't know, maybe more will come of this, or maybe Miliband's team will smarten up and not get whiny about the rules, because it doesn't endear you as... Like, if you're winning, you don't need to yell about the rules. You just win. Speaking of winning, let's jump to the federal race, where Avi Lewis unsurprisingly won the NDP leadership race. This is pretty widely covered, so we don't need to get deep into the analysis, I think. But unsurprising victory, 56% on the first round, which is the highest percentage for an NDP leader in its modern history of one member, one vote. Pretty definitive. I saw a little bit of breakdown from Eric Grenier of down ballot support. I don't know how he got it, but seems like Lewis had a lot of support on a lot of ballots. The only person's ballot who he wasn't second on was Rob Ashton, who, most of his supporter, or more of his supporters, supported McPherson second. But Lewis was pretty popular across the party through it. As long as you aren't the leaders of the Alberta or Saskatchewan NDP.
Well, that's what I'm curious about, is if there's a breakdown by region on there. I didn't see that in part of Grenier's piece I looked at.
I haven't seen any of it, and I haven't seen the NDP release it. The NDP doesn't weight by riding, so they have no need to even figure it out.
Right, but it would still be useful. Like, they probably should think about weighting by riding, because, as we see here, federal politics in Canada is regionally inflected by quite a bit, and you're not necessarily well served by just going hard in downtown Toronto and Vancouver. Presumably that's what happened here.
I don't think it is. Some of the fundraising data that had been released showed Lewis had strong support he was the leader in every province in fundraising except Alberta, where McPherson was the leader. And McPherson got most of her money from Alberta, but very little elsewhere, which is why she, posted a distant second. I think the other interesting thing in the results was Rob Ashton coming in fourth behind Tenniel Johnston by over 1,000 votes. His campaign just did not... It had some exciting NDP juice at the start, and he just could not turn it into anything. And there were specific, trip-ups along the way that harmed him additionally.
The AI answers on the Reddit AMA was probably where it really faltered. But the interesting thing with him is just how irrelevant organized labor was in all of this.
Mm-hmm.
I saw one analysis that across all the unions that endorsed him, they represented more than 600,000 workers. And he got, 4,700 votes, give or take?
4,200.
4,200. And, that translated into basically 0.7% of that union base actually turned out for him.
If it even was that, or if it was more a vibe.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. Is really, I think, goes to show that however much the NDP likes to think of themselves as, the party of labor and unions and whatnot, the actual organizational heft they actually wield is pretty negligible on there. And, there's probably also something to be said for the disconnect between union leadership and union members that is seen not just in this, but in some of the voting behavior we've seen just in general elections.
Well, and the related weakness of the unions this time was also seen in the table officer election, where the unions endorsed this kind of establishment slate of people who largely already have the role as incumbents. And this let's unseat the establishment slate, largely affiliated with Avi Lewis, comes forward at the last couple days and narrowly wins. And the unions are usually pretty good at coordinating votes and getting their resolutions passed at NDP conventions, and it didn't happen this time. And to be fair, if you look at the NDP over the last couple of years and someone runs on, hey, we've been doing a great job with this party, they shouldn't win. I think that should be universally acknowledged. Even if you're an incumbent, your position should be, well, we fucked up, but we're going to do better. Not...
Yeah, they haven't been doing great for the past, 10 years at least?
You could argue they treaded water with Singh for a while there, but things got tough and it fell apart.
He lost seats and vote share every election. That's been a long-term downward trajectory.
2019, 2021 were marginal.
It was still downward.
It was less so than before and after those two.
I mean, he started with what was the 2015 seat count? He started with 44 seats and never...
The NDP gained a seat in 2021, and they actually gained 2 points over 2019.
Okay, so there was a brief upward blip,
yeah.
But they've been on a long downward trajectory for a while.
So, a new executive, a new leader. The party posted more votes this time. I did look in 2012 and 2017, weirdly. They had 65,000 people vote roughly in both of those elections. And then they had 70,000 in this one, or 71,000. I'm actually surprised that 2017 and 2012 had the same votes, roughly. Very different eras for the NDP, right? 2012 was their high mark. But I guess Thomas Mulcair and Brian Topp weren't the most exciting of leadership candidates in hindsight. So that's Avi Lewis winning. Naheed Nenshi and Carla Beck obviously came out quite harshly quickly. David Eby took this congrats anyways approach, and Wab Kinew has just been cheering Avi Lewis on.
Yeah, there's a real tension between the federal and provincial parties, and particularly the ones in the West that are the parties that have a real shot at winning and forming government. The either they're in government like EB is, or
you think way too highly of the Saskatchewan NDP right now.
I mean, if anyone's going to form an opposition or a government from the opposition benches, it's going to be them. They're not doing great.
Unless it's the Buffalo Party comes out of nowhere. The recent history of the Saskatchewan NDP has not been inspiring.
And you just kind of say the same about the Alberta one for the last little bit too. But like, they are the ones that are at least trying to win government, and that's the metric they will be judged on that. And to do that, they have to appeal to a pretty broad swath in provinces that are not necessarily inherently inclined to vote for them, and that puts them in, quite a bit of tension with the new leader that is a real no holds barred, won't ever put water in his wine on anything leader that's going to be a problem for them going forward. And you already see the various parties opposite them try and tie them to Lewis's more unpopular and out there positions.
I don't think it's going to help them, because as I think we see, there was a piece today about the BC Conservative opposition trying to critique David Eby for connections to Avi Lewis and Adrian Dix, and the NDP basically just said, we're different.
Yeah, I think
everyone kind of knows it. Everyone kind of understands it. And
yeah, well, BC has the advantage there of having a long time in government to point to on that one. It's all a lot more hypothetical for the Alberta and Saskatchewan ones, which makes it a lot more effective as an attack.
The Alberta government should be so easy to beat right now. They're doing such stupid, crazy shit, and they're so bad, and Naheed Nenshi is just wildly incompetent, it seems.
And this is not going to help him on that either. Yeah, like those
and
parties,
neither is killing his base by discouraging them.
Well,
many of his base donated to Avi Lewis.
If you only win the NDP base, you will never be in government in Alberta. You need
those people to show up at the doors and to donate.
Well,
and to convince them
you just went on a whole thing about
noses.
how terrible Danielle Smith is. Like, if you can't at least get out on that front, like, what are you even doing? But the path to winning in Alberta does not go through the far left, or even just the NDP base on any of it. And, they need to take a different tact. And Avi Lewis has been incredibly unhelpful towards the Alberta NDP, not just in the last week. And that is for sure going to cause problems.
We're not going to agree on this, and I want to get on to our last story. I do want to just quickly mention that the real sad story after Avi Lewis won was his dad died 2 days later. Stephen Lewis, former leader of the Ontario NDP. Avi Lewis come in the grand tradition of Canadian political dynasties, whose grandfather helped found the NDP and was one of the first leaders of it. But Stephen Lewis was quite a well-spoken and widely regarded, elder statesman of the center left in Canada, and quite sadly missed. And at least he got to see his son win, I guess.
Yeah, held up for that. It's just nice to see that. But
and let's just go ahead.
Yeah, it is kind of noteworthy that Lewis is the third generation in his family to lead a NDP party.
Yes. Well, let's just finish on this Alto Rail story as quickly as we can, because we know we're already giving Jesse a giant chunk of audio to edit. It came out this week. The Conservatives don't like this train. They came out saying the Alto Rail project from Montreal to Toronto should be cancelled. It's costing too much. It threatens too many people's rights with expropriation. And we should just invest in the downtown Toronto airport and highways. And the Bloc said, hey, we agree. We also think this train should be reviewed and not pushed through.
So the downtown Toronto airport should probably be expanded, but not as an instead of, but in addition to this. Yeah. Both parties suck for their position on this. I can see why the conservatives don't like the idea of expropriation. That's very in keeping with their views on the matter, just outside of the specifics of this project. So, fair enough on like that's narrow critique, but the broader one they just missed the mark on. There's a long history of conservatives and rail projects going all the way back to the founding of the country. Like there's definitely a thing you can hit on that. The Ontario PCs just brought back a rail liner to Northern Ontario. Even Danielle Smith is talking about some rail projects in Alberta. It is well within the conservative tradition on this in Canada. So you don't need to come out swinging against it for the sake of, the party ideology or brand positioning or anything. And more to the point, the general vibe in the country in the last little while is being, let's get on with this and finally get stuff built and stop endlessly debating it or putting stuff through endless process and instead actually deliver real results. And meanwhile, we have the Bloc basically saying, no, the problem is we're not doing enough process on this. We need all the process. The thing that has meant we have done so many high-speed rail studies and never turned them into actual high-speed rail projects before. The Bloc thinks that's great, and we just need to keep doubling down on that. But
I only realized just before we started recording that the 3 federal by-elections, especially the Terrebonne one, are happening in like 2 weeks. And I suspect there's a high NIMBY portion there that both parties are trying to pursue, and that's what these specific announcements are about. Specifically, like Yves-François Blanchet announced this alongside his Terrebonne candidate. So maybe it's just that like hyper narrow politicking. It's very funny to me. There's a group that founded called Alt No as well. Anyway, they posted an Abacus poll that shows people like the train broadly.
Yeah, every party is positive on the train. The lowest
to differing degrees, but yeah.
Yeah, the lowest you find is 58% on it.
So, build that train. And that has been Politicoast. Find links to everything we talked about at politicoast.ca. Support the show and get access to our exclusive Slack channel at patreon.com/politicoast. Our intro music is Beautiful British Columbia by Serge Plotnikov. Politicoast is a production of Leg and Boot Media. Audio editing provided by Jesse Woodward at listener-supported CHLY 101.7 FM in Nanaimo. Learn more at chly.ca.